I love Doctor Who, and one of the great things about the show is that unlike in usual long-form dramatic series, which thanks to bad writing or production decisions, can fall into a quality slump lasting for several episodes or even entire seasons. In Doctor Who, you're usually never more than 45 minutes away from a trailer for something entirely different coming next episode. You may be sitting through Love and Monsters tonight, but hang on because you may have a blink coming next week. To love a thing is to accept its flaws, and since as fans we'd love to complain about the weather, I thought I'd list a few of the things in the show which have driven me absolutely, wall-crawlingly insane, irritating me up to the point that I might actually mention it to somebody. Not that it matters in the least. It's just the ephemera of one fan's hang-ups and personal peccadillos. But it's nice to vent gas sometimes, and there might even be someone out there who agrees with me. Number 1. Obnoxious music. There's a really egregious moment in the movie The Hitman's Bodyguard when Ryan Reynolds and Sam Jackson are in a car talking. And it's supposed to be funny. It isn't. But we know it's supposed to be because of the loud, obnoxious comedy music that plays desperately in the background. This moment has haunted me, a perfect encapsulation of the terror of bad comedy music, but I'd largely purged it from my mind until the 2024 Children in Need special, when I had a horrible flashback.
Multi-claw, adaptable. What is it? Oh. That's a Dalek.
Oh, good word. Dalek.
Unlike The Hitman's Bodyguard, this is a funny scene, which makes it all the more baffling that the creators chose to dub this Pee Wee Herman soundtrack over the whole thing. Let the actors be funny. Let us hear them. Instead, this music constantly nudges us in the ribs and says, hey, this is funny. Laugh time. Now. Unfortunately, this happens a lot, and not only with comedy sequences. It's like the music is overacting, adding sweeping orchestrations when they're not needed, drowning out emotional moments and tension. I don't blame the composers at all, but it feels like someone in the production process just doesn't quite get it, or are stuck in the mindset of regular children's television where everything has to be sonically spelled out for the little ones. On a purely personal level, I would prefer less orchestral music and a more of an electronic score in the tradition of the radiophonics workshop, but that's just my fancy. Number 2. Instantly dated references to bad television. I love and admire RTD, but the man clearly has terrible taste in television. He's always including references to reality shows and minor British TV celebrities who frankly don't merit additional attention. Bad Wolf is the first big example of this I can think of, with John Barrowman doing what he does in a scene that is now so badly dated it may become a space-time event. The show it's based on has vanished into the ether so completely that I had to look it up, and apparently one of the robots is Davina McCall, who later appeared in the church on Ruby Road. So maybe she and RTD are friends. Anyway, when she appeared in the Christmas special, my thoughts were with the American fans tuning in on Disney+, wondering who this woman was and subsequently going on a deep dive into mediocre British television, from which many will have emerged horribly changed. Number 3. Prophecy as a plot device. This irritates me so much that I can barely stand to talk about it. But needless to say that vague prophecies are an overused trope, not only on the show, but in much modern fiction. It's nice to dangle mysteries in front of people with a few tantalizing words, but having someone be depicted as an actually real psychic for this purpose is ponderous and uninteresting, and enforces the idea that there's any legitimacy to this grifting nonsense at all. It leaves one wondering if the producers have shares in one of those psychic hotlines that tricks old people out of their pensions. Number 4, comedy episodes. As I referenced earlier, the show can be very funny sometimes, but it can also be deeply unfunny in a queasy, uncomfortable way that makes me squirm in my seat while watching. Worst of all is when an entire episode is devoted to this shtick, with kiddie-level humor and that constant, grating comedy music. These episodes often feature comedians as guest stars, usually from the safest, most middle-of-the-road school of comedy, the kind of stuff that would be cutting edge if Hitler had won the war. It's hard to describe the pure dread I experience when I realize that this is going to be a comedy episode. I'm stuck here. There's bound to be stuff that relates to the overreaching arc, and I want to support the show because I want it to never go away, but having to sit through the kind of mediocre, light entertainment comedy which I have spent my whole life trying to avoid is a big ask. Just keep Mrs. Brown and her boys away from the show, please. I beg of you. Number 5. And with one bound, he was free. This is a real problem for this show, affecting multiple season finales and leaving a bad taste in the mouth after an otherwise satisfying adventure. Time and again, an interesting setup is spoiled by a quick, overly simple solution, usually involving magic, superpowers, and the kind of plot contrivances that feel like they were scribbled down at 4 a.m. after failing to think up a proper, clever ending. The fact that the Doc often has to triumphantly shout these things out loud, as exposition, just shows how difficult it is to come up with a satisfying solution that people actually understand. I personally would rather be baffled than just bored and disinterested, enjoying the show's more ambiguous endings, and I find it hard to believe that the same writer who penned the brilliantly confounding ending of 73 Yards also wrote the endings of Last of the Time Lords and Empire of Death. I just think the Doctor should be clever, and too many of these endings seem dumb, too far into comic book territory and horribly rushed. And I'd prefer 5 minutes less of the Doc hugging his companions and their entire extended family, and 5 more of actual plot, explaining how a death god can bring life by being dragged behind a TARDIS on a rope. Speaking of which, number 6, over-sentimentality. Okay, this is probably my problem more than the show's, but sometimes the level of cloying, presumptive sentimentality can be difficult to stomach. Maybe I'm overly cynical, but it takes a lot of work to make me care about a fictional character. I cried at the end of the movie Moon because I'd spent time with that character and grown to like and identify with him. I turned off the movie The Martian halfway through because its main character was a crushingly competent bore, and at that point, I actually wanted him to die. Maybe if I'd stuck around, though, I would have cared about handsome astronaut man, because 45 minutes isn't a lot of time to get emotionally entangled with somebody. Doctor Who frequently attempts to make me care and fails, with emotional beats falling flat and worse of all feeling forced, like you're at some kind of cult retreat being coerced into mandatory hugs. Also, frankly, I don't care about companions' families. I have a family too, big deal. I watch science fiction for stuff I don't see every day, and soap operas are not in short supply. I would like to add a note that this section of the video in particular should be ignored. Number 7. The Doctor's Kamikaze Brigade. This is the thing, in all honesty, that irks me most about the show, and was the inspiration for this video in the first place. I've lost count of how many characters have nobly sacrificed themselves on the Doctor's behalf. But the most egregious recent example I can think of is the old man who turns up at the end of The Timeless Children. We've seen him before briefly, with little suggestion that he has a death wish. But he turns up just in time, explaining how he's at some vague fault for something, and so has to be the one to make the sacrifice. The doc then thanks him curtly and leaves, seemingly forgetting his existence as soon as he's left her peripheral vision, as does the viewer. Out of all of the things listed here, this stuff leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. It's lazy and feels weirdly religious in this show in a way it doesn't in other media where the trope is also very overused. In real life, very few people sacrifice their lives for good causes, but plenty do for the bad ones. Number 8. Dalek hierarchy. Okay, this is something deeply important to the future of humanity. Dalek hierarchy is an unintuitive mess, and the show keeps ignoring it. In the good old days, the drones were gray or silver, and the leaders were black or gold. It made sense and was a quick visual reference. When the new show started, the Daleks were all bronze, which was fine, and there was even a cool black Dalek in charge for a while. But since then, we've mostly just seen bronze Daleks talking to each other, with no indication of who's in charge except for their location on the set. This was all compounded when the Dalek Supreme turned up in the series' 4-season finale in a red color scheme which had previous associations with mid-level Dalek commanders, if mostly in spin-off media. And then there was Victory of the Daleks. And surely the most baffling aspect of that whole thing was the color scheme applied to the new paradigm. White for the Supreme is fine. It makes sense and stands out from the others. But why in the name of all that is holy is the scientist orange? Nothing about that color suggests science to me. It suggests the smell of orange tango that's been spilled in the corner of a basement room. Then worse of all, the drone is red, meaning that the lowest order of the Dalek race is now wearing the same getup as the highest. God help us all, for we are truly damned. Obviously, it doesn't matter at all, but I like to get my Daleks in a row, and hate it when they stand out like that awful Simpsons box set. In conclusion, all of this stuff may seem trivial, but in fact, it's a serious situation. If they keep doing these kind of things, and if they cast Lawrence Fox as the Doctor with the cast of Mrs. Brown's Boys as companions, I may have to stop watching the show altogether. But I think we'll be just fine. The show can make as many wild leaps as it likes, and I'll still support and watch it, even if I have to hide behind the sofa when the bad comedy starts.